Most people know the history of World War II, but what if I told you there were missions, experiments, and sacrifices so secret they were erased from the records? Tonight, we uncover the untold story of Project Tempest, a weapon so dangerous it nearly changed the course of history, and the Harrow family, whose legacy of innovation and destruction spanned generations. Brace yourself, because this is a story you won't find in any textbook. In the waning years of the 19th century, when Britain's skies were still blackened by the soot of progress, Dr. Alastair Harrow worked in a private laboratory on the outskirts of Birmingham. The building, an abandoned textile mill repurposed under the War Office's discreet funding, was a place where science and secrecy had learned to coexist. Rows of glass vessels simmered with pale blue liquid. The smell of sulfur clung to the air like memory. Outside, the Midlands coughed smoke into a gray dawn that no longer knew silence. Harrow was 41, a chemist by training and a theorist by compulsion. His work, codenamed Project Iron Thesis, sought to eliminate combustion from propulsion to create movement born of reaction rather than flame. The logic was sound, even elegant. If an artillery shell could propel itself without powder or ignition, it could travel further, strike faster, and burn colder. A weapon that left no trace of heat, no light, no warning. The War Office approved the project in theory, but denied it publicly. To the scientific community, Harrow had simply retired early. To the ministry, he had become a necessary silence. His laboratory notebooks, written in precise copperplate, chronicled more than equations. They contained observations of energy behaving outside prediction, chemical compounds that seemed to store charge longer than any known element. The reactions produced faint vibrations that resonated through metal surfaces, enough to make the tables hum. Assistants noted the effect in passing. Harrow ignored it. Every discovery, he reminded himself, must first appear as an error. Britain's appetite for superiority was boundless. France tested new artillery compounds. Germany refined zeppelins. The empire, stretched thin across oceans, demanded innovation faster than it could regulate it. Harrow's reports, stamped confidential, for eyes of command only, promised a future where distance and destruction would be the same. His pay doubled. His conscience halved. On the morning of December 11, 1895, the first prototype was tested in the lower chamber. A cylinder of nickel alloy, 1 meter long, placed within a reinforced iron cradle. Harrow recorded each metric: pressure, density, current, while a junior officer noted compass readings at fixed distances. The ignition-less reaction, once activated, would expel energy through sustained chemical expansion, or so the formula predicted. When the sequence began, there was no flash, no sound, only the slow bloom of vibration, subtle at first, then pulsing, rhythmic, unnatural. The compass needles turned of their own accord, spinning until they pointed nowhere. Tools lifted slightly off their hooks. The floor resonated with a tone too low to name, more felt than heard. Harrow's assistant, pale and wide-eyed, asked if they should abort. Harrow did not answer. He watched the machine emit a faint blue radiance, like gaslight filtered through water. His mind calculated yields, pressures, tolerances, but a second part, silent and untrained, recognized something else entirely. The reaction was not consuming fuel. It was sustaining itself. When the reaction ceased, there was no smoke, no residue, no measurable heat. Yet the hum persisted, faint but constant, like the afterimage of sound. The instruments refused to stabilize. Every compass in the room pointed directly toward the cylinder, though it lay motionless and cold. The officer filed his brief within the hour. Successful preliminary activation, it read. Anomalous magnetic distortion observed. No combustion present. Further tests recommended. Harrow stayed behind after dismissal, alone with the machine. The light from his desk lamp quivered. On the laboratory floor, filings of iron shifted slowly into new shapes, as though aligning to a hidden geometry. He placed a hand against the cylinder. It was cold, still, yet deep within, it seemed to breathe. In the margin of his final report that night, Harrow added a single line in ink slightly darker than the rest. The weapon hums, though the fire is cold. And for reasons no one could later explain, the hum never stopped. By the turn of the new century, The ambitions of empires had learned the value of discretion. Officially, Britain and France were bound by mutual curiosity, a scientific exchange under the guise of coastal fortification research. Unofficially, both governments sought the same thing: mastery over reactionless propulsion, a weapon that could move without warning, strike without light. The Calais facility was chosen for its isolation. A half-finished naval depot along the French coast, its tunnels smelled of salt and rust, the air thick with sea mist that corroded metal within days. The collaboration was conducted under Joint Experimental Directive No. 4B, a classified memorandum signed by both defense ministries. Few outside the military circles knew it existed. Dr. Alastair Harrow, now gray-templed and weary, was brought out of obscurity to oversee the second phase of his creation. His original iron thesis engine, confiscated a decade earlier, had been refitted into a smaller, more compact form, a nickel chamber lined with reactive crystals derived from early chemical batteries. The goal: sustained propulsion for naval weaponry without heat signature or smoke. Among the observers were Colonel Émile Varnier of the French Artillery Bureau and Captain Theodore Raines, a British engineer whose duty was to record magnetic deviations. Their official notes described optimism. Their private expressions betrayed unease. The experiment began at dusk on the 17th of March, 1905. Candles flickered along the chamber walls, the only light source permitted due to concerns of chemical interference. The prototype was bolted to a steel dais, its surface slick with condensation. Instruments, compasses, voltmeters, and primitive oscillographs lined the observation table. Harrow, ever meticulous, recorded every variable: ambient humidity, salinity, even the pitch of the wind outside. When activation commenced, the reaction behaved precisely as designed. There was no combustion, no spark. A silent pulse rippled outward, gentle as breath. The dials trembled once, then steadied. The engineers exchanged cautious nods. For a moment, it seemed that the impossible had been domesticated. Then, without warning, the candles bent inward, their flames drawn toward the chamber. The voltmeters spiked erratically. The walls, though reinforced, began to vibrate as if struck by invisible resonance. A faint hum spread through the floor, low, pulsing, almost rhythmic. The French technicians crossed themselves. The British officers did not move. Power surged through the auxiliary cables, burning out half the instruments. Compass needles spun uselessly. Salt crystals formed instantly across the steel floor, blooming like frost. Within the hour, the equipment began to corrode, a process no one could explain. Bolts turned green. Copper wires crumbled. The air carried a tang of ozone and decay. Harrow noted all of it, his hand steady even as the sound deepened. Magnetic saturation, he murmured to Vernier. Possibly environmental interference. Yet his eyes betrayed uncertainty. At midnight, a dull flash lit the chamber, not from fire, but from compression. The prototype emitted a single pulse that cracked the iron dais. The sound, captured later in a phonograph log, was described as a mechanical sigh. The experiment was aborted. The chamber sealed. When the team reconvened the next morning, corrosion had spread across every exposed surface. Instruments were fused. The notebook containing the chemical sequence, Harrow's formula for stable containment, was missing. Guards reported no intrusion. Doors had not been forced. The War Office inquiry concluded human error in documentation. But Varnier's report, marked eyes only, told another story. He described seeing movement inside the metal, ripples across the surface of the chamber like breath under skin. He wrote that the light around it dimmed unnaturally, as though absorbed. By the time the British delegation returned to London, the prototype had been dismantled, its fragments sealed in separate crates labeled naval scrap. That night, one French technician, sleep-deprived, trembling, was overheard muttering in the canteen to no one in particular. "It's not an engine. It's alive." Weeks later, when the Calais facility was decommissioned, investigators noted an anomaly. The storage vault where the prototype had stood still vibrated faintly. Compass readings at the site failed to stabilize, even after the equipment was removed. Only one notebook was ever recovered. Its final entry, in Harrow's hand, read, "Power deepens in silence. The hum grows." And beneath the ink, barely visible under ultraviolet light, Another scrawl appeared, likely added later. It hears. In April of 1915, near the Belgian town of Ypres, the air itself became a weapon. What began as another day of attrition, men counting hours between shells, ended as one of the most haunting experiments in modern warfare. Official records later called it an atmospheric anomaly. Soldiers called it the Green Death. The front that morning was unnervingly quiet. Frost clung to the edges of wire, rifles leaned against trench walls, and the stench of stagnant water mixed with iron. Engineers checked artillery gauges, unaware that the next weapon had already been released, not from a cannon, but from a series of cylinders, turned open by hand. The first wave rolled low over no man's land, a pale green vapor moving against the wind, hugging the mud, sliding into shell craters. Men mistook it for morning fog until it touched their lungs. Within seconds, shouts turned to coughing, then to silence broken only by the bubbling sound of breath. Eyewitness accounts described the vapor as luminous in places, like light caught in oil. British units of the 1st Canadian Division were among the first to encounter it. Masks were not yet standard issue. Most soldiers pressed rags soaked in urine over their faces, the ammonia offering the only crude defense they had. Medics noted that the gas irritated the eyes and mucous membranes, causing blindness and panic before suffocation. By evening, thousands were dead. Yet amid the horror, one report stood out. In a forward command dugout, Lieutenant Dr. Samuel Hargreaves, a field chemist attached to the Royal Engineers, collected samples of the residue coating the trenches. His analysis, hastily performed under candlelight, revealed an unexpected impurity in the chlorine mixture, a trace element that did not belong. The readings disturbed him. They suggested a reaction not achievable through the known German chemical process. Instead, the residue exhibited unusual electromagnetic alignment, metallic particles arranged along invisible vectors. Hargreaves had seen that pattern before, though he could not recall where. The next morning, as artillery resumed and new canisters were reported along the front, Hargreaves requested access to older War Office records, specifically those pertaining to experimental propulsion. His superior, Captain Lorne, dismissed the inquiry. "This is war, doctor," he said, "not a laboratory." But Hargreaves persisted. Through coded correspondence with London, he obtained fragments of declassified data from a pre-war chemical study, authored by one Dr. Alistair Harrow. The description was unmistakable: a reactive compound that emitted no heat, distorted magnetic fields, and left behind crystalline corrosion. The formula's marginal notes referred to silent ignition, a phrase echoed in the chemical shorthand of the recovered gas samples. By late May, the connection became undeniable. The weapon used by the enemy bore a chemical signature derived from British research nearly a decade old. The formula had not been stolen. It had been forgotten, then rediscovered, reborn in another nation's laboratories. Officially, no such lineage existed. The War Office denied Harrow's involvement. His work, they claimed, had been terminated in 1906. Yet somewhere between lost archives and industrial espionage, the knowledge had survived, detached from its origin, evolving in secrecy until it returned to the battlefield in the most horrifying form imaginable. Field reports from Ypres described more than physical devastation. Telegraph operators recorded magnetic interference throughout the attack zone. Compasses spun erratically, and signal lines carried low-frequency hums days after the assault. Officers dismissed them as atmospheric disturbances. Weeks later, during a lull in the fighting, Hargreaves prepared a confidential memorandum for the War Office. Only fragments survive. The final line reads, "The composition matches Harrow's lost 1905 notes, sample B, 12 through C, 14. The reaction is stable, self-replicating under atmospheric moisture." This was not German innovation. This was ours. That night, the gas returned, rolling again from the same trenches, moving against the wind. The soldiers below could not see it coming, but they could hear it, a soft, mechanical hum spreading through the fog. And then came the silence. In early 1917, the war had turned mechanical. Men, shells, and data moved according to patterns that no longer required thought, only repetition. Far from the front, behind layers of official secrecy, an Allied research complex operated under a name absent from every map: Valkyrie Field. Located near the Welsh border, the facility occupied the remains of an abandoned textile mill. Its corridors smelled of rust and disinfectant, and its windows were painted black. No one outside its wire fences knew that beneath the cover of medical testing, it housed the dissection of modern warfare's most forbidden creation. Inside, scientists labored in dim light, their faces half hidden behind early prototypes of gas respirators. The air compressors hissed constantly, their steady rhythm masking the soft clicking of typewriters and the distant hum of generators. Each morning began the same way. One shell selected from the secured stockpile, cataloged, then carefully unsealed for analysis. Every motion was recorded, every word spoken measured against the fear of what might escape. The canisters had been retrieved from the Ypres sector, German-marked, yet their internal chemistry betrayed a different lineage. Lead researcher Dr. Lionel Vance described the residue as unstable, as if still remembering the reaction that birthed it. Under magnification, crystalline patterns pulsed faintly, aligning and dissolving as though obeying invisible instructions. Technicians built crude respirators using cotton layers soaked in thiosulfate and charcoal filters. These early designs saved few lives in the field, but became the prototypes for modern gas masks. Their development came at a human cost. At least 3 assistants collapsed during exposure tests, their lungs filled not with gas, but with vaporized compounds that clung to mucous membranes. The official diagnosis was laboratory fatigue. Reports from Valkyrie Field were filed not through the War Office, but through a private bureau known only as Department C. Each file was stamped restricted until 1950, and each contained precise, emotionless entries. Sample B. 23 reacts to moisture. Emits low-frequency vibration. Residual magnetic flux persists after sealing. Personnel advised to wear lead-threaded gloves during inspection, but one entry stood apart. On October 12th, an experiment on canister 44B produced anomalous behavior. After routine inspection, the canister was resealed and placed in containment. Within hours, condensation formed inside the steel casing. Instruments detected micromovements, an internal pressure increase inconsistent with sealed integrity. Dr. Vance ordered isolation. The hum began the following night. Technicians described it as barely audible, like a low note vibrating through concrete. Instruments confirmed electromagnetic interference across the facility's power grid. Telegraph lines crackled with noise even when disconnected. No one slept. The air itself seemed to tremble. Vance dictated his observations directly onto phonograph cylinders to avoid written leaks. One recording survives. Its transcription marked end of session, 2:47 hours. Containment appears intact. However, the sound persists even when the chamber is grounded. There is no heat, no visible reaction. It is as if the substance remembers ignition but refuses to burn again. Moments later, the recording ends abruptly in a burst of static. The next file begins the following morning, with a single sentence typed in red ink. Session incomplete. Personnel missing. Dr. Lionel Vance, 3 assistants. In the days that followed, Valkyrie Field was quietly evacuated. Department C ordered all remaining material sealed in lead crates and shipped to an undisclosed site in Berkshire. No press notice, no formal closure. The official reason cited, structural instability. When inspectors returned months later, they found the lab untouched, papers on desks, coffee cups half-filled, and the canister still on its stand. Instruments around it ticked faintly, despite the power being cut. The final entry in the logbook reads, audio transmission terminated mid-observation. Static continued for 7 minutes. Then silence. And beneath it, in handwriting not found elsewhere in the file, the hum hasn't stopped. The guns of the Great War fell silent on a fog-dampened November morning. Across Europe, flags unfurled in cautious celebration. Men returned home thinner, quieter, and altered beyond repair. Governments promised peace. Industry promised progress. But beneath the paperwork of reconstruction, the same hands that had built machines of death were already drafting new designs, this time under gentler names. In 1920, Britain's Ministry of Supply created a series of scientific redeployment initiatives. On paper, their purpose was rehabilitation, to place former wartime researchers back into civilian work. In practice, They became conduits for continuity. Laboratories shuttered during the armistice were quietly reopened under new funding lines. Chemistry divisions became energy bureaus, and weapons researchers became industrial consultants. Among the names reappearing in the registries was Dr. Lionel Vance, listed as deceased in 1917. His personnel file, marked erroneous death report, was reactivated and transferred to a post within a division titled Agricultural Development, Berkshire office. The appointment drew no attention. Britain was rebuilding, and agriculture was a symbol of renewal. No one questioned why his train ticket was one way, or why his baggage required armed escort. Parliament debated disarmament with noble words and hollow conviction. The Treaty of Versailles limited production of armaments across Europe, but chemical industries thrived under the banner of fertilizers and fuels. The same laboratories that once refined gas shells now produced nitrates for farming and synthetic fuels for transport. Behind their painted windows, the distinction between civilian and military blurred until it disappeared entirely. Files declassified decades later reveal that Valkyrie Field, officially decommissioned in 1918, reopened in 1922 under a new designation, Project Tempest. The stated goal was environmental propulsion research. Its true directive was to continue studying reactive compounds salvaged from wartime experiments, materials that, according to internal memos, demonstrate sustained magnetic resonance even in inert containment. Dr. Vance's letters from the period are written in the stiff courtesy of bureaucratic correspondence, but occasional slips suggest unease. They tell us the purpose is agricultural, energy for irrigation, growth stimulation. Yet the compound reacts to exposure with no agricultural benefit. Its hum continues, faint but measurable. The others pretend not to hear it. The public face of Britain in the 1920s was optimism. New cars on roads, wireless signals crossing oceans, the world made smaller by invention. But in government basements and sealed warehouses, the machinery of war never stopped breathing. On the night of March 3, 1924, an internal telegram circulated through 5 departments before reaching its final recipient. It bore no signature, only a numerical code and 9 words typed in standard telegraphic format. Project Tempest recommissioned under ministry oversight. It breathes again. No official commentary followed. The file was archived under Agricultural Research, Coastal Division, and sealed for 50 years. That same week, witnesses at a small rail station near Reading observed a military freight train halted for inspection. Guards stood unusually still, faces obscured beneath caps. The cargo manifested as soil enhancement equipment, though no agricultural machinery was visible. Instead, the train-sealed compartments bore faint chemical warnings, partially erased by fresh paint. As dawn broke, the train departed south toward Berkshire. On its manifest, the destination field was left blank. At the same hour in London, a clerk at the Ministry of Defense logged the telegram into storage, unaware of its meaning. The rain pressed softly against the office glass. The ink on the page bled slightly, turning the final word into a faint shadow. He blotted it, wrote the reference code in the margin, and filed it under inactive. The file's final note reads, "Crates relocated under Agricultural Division by order of Department C." Then, one line typed in red ink. No explanation, no initials. It breathes again. By September 1939, the drums of war had begun to echo across Europe once more. Air raid sirens were not yet commonplace, but laboratories buzzed with a silent urgency, corridors of steel and concrete vibrating with the hum of dynamos. Within one such facility, hidden beneath the outskirts of Oxfordshire, Dr. Reginald Harrow labored under orders he had never sought. Grandson of the original inventor, he carried the legacy of Alastair Harrow like a shadow across his conscience. The white fire compound, a product of decades-old research, had resurfaced in memoranda dating back to Project Tempest. Initially dormant, its formula had been preserved in microfilm and encrypted notebooks, surviving post-war bureaucratic purges. Now, as Britain prepared for its next great confrontation, it was resurrected under the direct authority of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, silent, urgent, and unquestioned. Reginald's office smelled of metal and ozone, a mixture familiar yet oppressive. The compound lay in sealed canisters across reinforced steel benches, each tagged with a numerical code rather than a name. Small sensors were embedded along the work table to measure microfluctuations, electromagnetic interference, and thermal output. Theoretical calculations predicted energy release, but nothing in the Harrow lineage had prepared anyone for its current potency. Early tests were designed to measure stability. The compound was compressed within a containment sphere, then triggered in a controlled sequence. The first ignition produced no flame, no smoke, only a subtle vibration that traveled through the floors, walls, and instrumentation. Readings were steady until the final phase, when pressure surged unexpectedly. Instruments maxed out. Microfractures appeared along the casing. Then, with a metallic sigh, the sphere expelled energy 4 times greater than predicted. The control room remained silent. Every scientist understood the numbers, but not their implications. A yield exceeding projection by 400% was not a miscalculation, it was a warning. Reginald, calculating yields, recoil, and dispersal, felt the inherited guilt of his grandfather's ambition. The men and women around him moved with disciplined precision, yet their eyes betrayed unease. Churchill's authorization was clear. The weapon must be refined, tested, and integrated into operational plans. No question of morality could temper the urgency of survival. The corridors hummed with power. Generators pulsed in rhythm with instrumentation. Condensation clung to the cold steel walls. Microalarms monitored stress points. Outside, storm clouds rolled across the autumn sky, unnoticed by the staff consumed in calculation and duty. Harrow compiled the latest readings into a memorandum: pressure curves, energy dispersion, magnetic anomalies. Every datum confirmed the grim reality. The compound was more destructive than any ordnance in active service. When the report was delivered to the War Office, a single directive was appended: next test site, within range of London. No explanation accompanied it. The gravity of proximity settled over the facility like a dense fog. Engineers and technicians continued work, calibrating instruments and double-checking containment procedures. Even as the compound hummed quietly, emitting low-frequency vibrations detectable only by the most sensitive equipment, the hum became a measure of anticipation, fear, and responsibility. Reginald remained at the table, hand hovering over a canister. His calculations projected potential blast radii, collateral zones, and fallout patterns. The numbers were precise. The moral certainty was absent. As night fell and the generator's hum became a constant undercurrent, one fact remained: the weapon was awake, overpowered, and positioned, legally, bureaucratically, and geographically, within the heart of Britain's most populated city. The final line in the laboratory log, typed in detached, archival tone, read simply: test yields exceed all prediction. Next site, within range of London. And beneath it, almost imperceptibly, the hum continued. Beneath the streets of London, far below the blacked-out city, the heartbeat of war took a different form. Not the rumble of bombers or the whistle of shells, but a precise, mechanical rhythm, the controlled pulse of experimental engineering. Here, in a sealed network of abandoned subway tunnels, engineers conducted the most perilous test of Britain's clandestine chemical research. The compound, colloquially known among staff as white fire, had proven unpredictable in laboratory settings. Its reactive properties defied conventional ignition, producing energy without flame, heat, or smoke. Its triggers, subtle, were suspected to respond to electromagnetic fluctuations rather than thermal input, a discovery that would soon terrify even the most experienced officers. The test site, codenamed Subterrane 7, occupied the disused City and South London Railway tunnels near Bermondsey. Thick steel plates reinforced the walls. Water dripped steadily from fractured masonry. The air was heavy with condensation, and the constant hum of ventilation units added a low-frequency undertone to the subterranean quiet. Engineers navigated the narrow corridors carrying instruments and sealed canisters, the flicker of carbide lamps reflecting off wet concrete. Each step had been calculated, each wire tensioned. Explosive chambers were arranged to simulate enemy bunker structures. Calculations predicted force dispersal, containment stress, and magnetic interference. The compound's containment spheres had been designed to isolate thermal reactions, but no one fully accounted for its sensitivity to magnetic fields. The initial test sequence commenced at 8:42 hours. A technician activated the power feed while monitoring stabilizers. For the first minute, readings appeared nominal. Sensors logged pressure, voltage, and minute shifts in the chamber lattice. Then, a subtle anomaly emerged. Compass needles along the observation line began to twitch. Instruments registered magnetic flux where none should exist. A deeper pulse resonated through the tunnel. The steel containment showed micro-vibrations, almost imperceptible, but the engineers detected them instantly. Adjustments were made to compensate. Control systems hummed, alarms poised to engage. Yet the reaction continued, as if acknowledging human oversight, but refusing to obey. By 9:07, containment failed. The chamber vibrated violently. A low-frequency resonance propagated through the tunnels, unsettling equipment and loosening fixtures. Steel conduits shivered. Water pooled on the floors surged in tiny ripples along the seams. Readings indicated energy output exceeding predictions by several multiples, though no combustion occurred. The walls did not burn, they shivered. The Thames barrier above the city had detected negligible tremors, a warning of proximity risk. Technicians attempted a manual override. Electrical systems were shut down, breakers engaged, and the main feed cut. The compound reacted with silence, producing only a faint hum. The instruments, disconnected and powerless, continued to tick. Mechanical logs, magnetic sensors, and oscillographs registered activity without energy input. The engineers, aware of the anomaly, documented the failure with meticulous precision. There was no panic, only disciplined observation. Every anomaly, every subtle tremor, was recorded for post-test analysis. By midday, Subterrane 7 was evacuated. The test chamber was sealed, yet the instruments continued to register pulses. Magnetic readings persisted, fluctuating as though acknowledging the presence of observers. The final entry in the engineering log, written in clinical, detached language, noted, "Containment fails under magnetic influence. Energy persists post-power cut. Instruments continue ticking. No thermal ignition observed. Risk unacceptable." Even after the team withdrew, a faint hum lingered in the tunnel, imperceptible to the human ear but measurable on all recording devices. In the silence beneath London, white fire had proven one immutable truth. Its behavior was independent of the rules that governed men and machines. And above, the city carried on, oblivious to the mechanical horror still alive in its veins. June 1943 brought storms to southern England unlike any seen in years. Rain struck the corrugated roofs of the Berkshire facility in sheets, turning the surrounding fields into mud flats. Lightning arced across the sky, reflecting off metal supports and wet concrete. Within the underground laboratory, the white fire containment chamber trembled in response, not to the storm, but to its own unpredictable chemistry. At 2:17 hours, sensors detected microfractures forming along the chamber walls. Pressure readings climbed rapidly. Alarms, red and insistent, illuminated the tunnels with harsh pulses. Smoke began to rise from minor leaks, carrying the scent of metal and ozone. The facility's automated systems attempted to compensate. Venting valves, magnetic dampeners, and emergency absorbers engaged, but the compound resisted. Its behavior defied mechanical logic. Lieutenant Thomas Avery, assigned to the night shift, observed the instruments with trained detachment. Generators hummed and faltered under the storm's influence, but Avery knew what automation could not handle: the human element. He understood that without intervention, the next microburst could trigger a catastrophic reaction. London itself laid downwind. With methodical precision, Avery donned protective gear and descended into the chamber. Red warning lights flickered against the damp walls as thunder shook the tunnels. Each step was calculated, measured, yet every movement carried the weight of imminent failure. The air vibrated with low-frequency pulses, almost imperceptible, but the instruments confirmed their presence. The compound's internal energy was increasing. Manual override procedures were engaged. Valves, normally controlled remotely, were turned by hand. Avery monitored pressure gauges, observing minute drops as the chamber vented partially into secondary containment shafts. Sparks from electrical conduits danced across wet floors. each flash illuminating his face, a mask of concentration over fear. Sweat mixed with rainwater that seeped from the tunnel ceilings. For 24 minutes, Avery worked alone. One misstep could have triggered a runaway reaction. His breathing, muffled by the respirator, was steady, betraying no panic. He adjusted magnetic dampeners, realigned containment plates, and guided the venting sequence. Sensors spiked and plummeted in unpredictable patterns. Then, as lightning struck the facility's antenna mast, the system experienced a near-total power failure. All automatic monitoring ceased. Avery relied entirely on tactile feedback and visual observation. With one final adjustment, he sealed the primary containment chamber and returned to the observation tunnel. The readings began to normalize. The red alarms faded to silence. Instruments, once wildly erratic, settled into a steady baseline. Avery, collapsing against the wet wall, understood what had occurred. The compound had stabilized itself. No external input, no intervention by machinery or man, had brought equilibrium. It was as if the chemical entity had adapted, responding to its environment in ways science could not yet comprehend. In the aftermath, colleagues found Avery unconscious, respirator charred at the edges. He survived long enough to whisper a single report into the log. Containment restored, but not by any procedure we designed. No formal record exists of the precise mechanisms involved. The War Office archived the night under classified protocols, with personnel files marking Avery's heroism as commendable yet circumscribed. The final note in the chamber log reads, "It did not stop. It evolved. Observation suggests autonomous stabilization. Risk remains high. Human exposure not recommended." Outside, thunder receded into distant rumble. Inside, a faint, low-frequency hum persisted, a reminder that even in calm, the white fire was never dormant, only patient. The war had ended, but its shadows lingered long after the last gunfire faded. In London and across the countryside, Britain began the slow, meticulous work of reconstruction. Amid the rubble and ration lines, another operation unfolded quietly in the heart of the Ministry of Defense, the deliberate burial of Project Tempest. Files were shredded, copied on a microfilm, and misfiled under categories designed to mislead future researchers. Death certificates were fabricated for personnel no longer listed in the registry. Scientists whose names had once appeared on payrolls and test logs simply vanished from existence. Dr. Reginald Harrow, once the driving force behind the resurrection of the White Fire compound, had no known fate. His photograph was removed from archives. Office furniture reassigned, as if he had never walked those halls. Vaults across the country were reinforced, sealed, and abandoned. Lead-lined crates, labeled ambiguously as chemical research, decommissioned, were stored in subterranean bunkers. Every crate contained instruments, canisters, and fragments of Project Tempest's research, but no documentation. A single oversight could not be allowed. Any trace of the experiment surviving outside controlled channels represented risk, moral and geopolitical. In the days immediately following VE Day, low-level inspectors and archivists performed routine sweeps. They cataloged papers and typed new covers for missing files. Each office smelled of ash, dust, and disinfectant, as if erasing the memory of the war required the scent of sterilization. Corridors echoed with the footsteps of clerks and security personnel, moving quickly and deliberately. The silence was absolute. Conversation was minimized to preserve secrecy. Despite these efforts, anomalies began to appear. Sensors in several sealed bunkers, designed to monitor environmental integrity, detected faint fluctuations in energy readings. Nothing that could be classified as active or hazardous, but inexplicable hums that persisted in the absence of power. Technicians logged the readings as anomalous residual flux, attributing it to minor electromagnetic interference. Yet the data defied conventional explanation. Readings were cyclical, subtle, and recorded across multiple locations. In Berkshire, a high-security vault, officially listed as decommissioned, exhibited an unusual phenomenon. Surveillance footage, maintained for posterity and security, captured a flicker of light behind the sealed steel door. It appeared as if some internal mechanism had activated, but repeated inspections confirmed the door remained locked, the power disconnected. Officers on duty made notes with the cold precision expected of official procedure. Vault 12, no entry. Light detected 3:12 hours. No electrical feed. Personnel advised to observe but not engage. Situation classified Level 1 confidential. The moral weight of bureaucratic erasure was pervasive. Senior officials understood the implications. The weapon had not been destroyed, merely hidden. Its persistence, though silent, suggested a memory within the chemical and magnetic structures themselves. The very substance that had terrorized the underground tunnels beneath London in 1941 and stabilized autonomously in 1943 now lingered in the shadows of state archives. Reports indicate that during routine inspection, a junior officer, observing the flicker through a small viewport, muttered in disbelief, "It's still alive." No further commentary was permitted. The observation was recorded, classified, and archived, reinforcing the culture of controlled silence that governed all post-war records. The final line in the archive summary, typed with the detached rigor of bureaucratic record-keeping, reads simply, "Project Tempest sealed. Personnel erased. Residual activity detected. Observation continues." And somewhere behind reinforced steel and layers of secrecy, a faint light continued to flicker, a ghostly pulse that hinted the experiment had never truly ended. By 1953, the world had pivoted from the ruins of global war into a new era of silent terror. The Cold War had settled over Europe like a gray fog, permeating offices, streets, and minds with suspicion. In London, the corridors of MI6 smelled of cigarette smoke and aged paper, punctuated by the low hum of tape recorders that endlessly captured voices, static, and coded phrases. Among the declassified files of early Cold War operations, one anomaly remained persistently troubling: the so-called Berkshire anomaly, a residual energy signature that defied known science. MI6 had detected the first Soviet probes months earlier. Low-flying reconnaissance aircraft were mapped over Berkshire, ostensibly as nuclear surveillance. Ground operatives reported unusual activity around disused Ministry of Defense sites, areas long sealed after Project Tempest closure. Investigators were initially skeptical. Chemical anomalies from a decades-old British experiment? Ridiculous. Yet field sensors confirmed weak, fluctuating energy pulses emanating from the old bunkers. Agents were dispatched to monitor, photograph, and occasionally intercept Soviet teams attempting entry into restricted zones. Equipment was calibrated to detect radiation, magnetic resonance, and electromagnetic spikes. On one occasion, a small contingent of Soviet operatives approached an abandoned bunker under cover of night. The sensors registered elevated readings in proximity, but no radioactive material existed. Within hours, the team suffered acute health failures, collapsing with symptoms resembling severe radiation exposure. British operatives, observing remotely, cataloged the incident in detached logs. Chemical nature unknown, biological effects significant. MI6 analysts reviewed decades-old research, connecting anomalies to Project Tempest and the experimental Whitefire compound. While the material had never been nuclear, its residual energy produced electromagnetic and subatomic interactions strong enough to induce cellular disruption. Intelligence officers struggled to reconcile scientific data with operational reports. The weapon, presumed dormant for 10 years, was still capable of harm, and its presence had drawn the attention of the Soviet Union. Inside MI6 headquarters, senior analysts worked in dimly lit rooms. Cigarette smoke swirled through stale air, curling around tape reels, typewriters, and stacks of confidential files. Analysts cross-referenced Soviet communications with archival British research, identifying references to an unidentified field at Berkshire. Frequency modulation and coded phrases appeared sporadically in intercepts. Finally, during one late-night session, the listening post recorded a voice transmitting in broken English, "The field is alive." The phrase echoed in the silent room. Analysts verified the transmission, replaying the tape repeatedly. Every acoustic artifact, every static spike, confirmed authenticity. The implication was clear: the compound's residual energy was recognized internationally, considered hazardous, and potentially weaponized by foreign powers. For operatives on the ground, caution replaced curiosity. Protocols forbade direct engagement. Observers documented anomalies from a safe distance, noting faint hums, magnetic fluctuations, and unexplained lights behind sealed steel doors. Sensors recorded subtle pulses in synchrony with historical Project Tempest test times, suggesting a periodic, almost conscious recurrence. Even within MI6, the implications weighed heavily. No official report could explain the phenomenon, only catalog the incidents, emphasize containment, and note the deaths of foreign agents. The presence of residual white fire energy was a secret within a secret, a ghost of a wartime experiment now entwined with international tension. The final entry in the MI6 surveillance log reads, "Berkshire anomaly persists. Soviet interest confirmed. Agents exposed. The field is alive. Continue observation." Outside, the rain fell quietly over London, muffling the sounds of the city while deep below, a dormant energy continued its slow, deliberate pulse. In the early months of 1963, as declassification efforts swept through the Ministry of Defense, archivists and investigators stumbled upon an anomaly, a welded steel vault, unlisted in any file and hidden beneath layers of administrative oversight. Its location, deep within the labyrinthine sub-basements of Whitehall, had escaped decades of cataloging, a remnant of Britain's wartime secrecy. A small team of mod specialists arrived to examine the vault. Each wore white gloves, carrying clipboards, portable sensors, and precision tools. The air was sterile and faintly metallic, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors. The hum of ventilation units mingled with the occasional click of instruments, creating a background rhythm that was both reassuring and ominous. The vault door had been welded shut and reinforced with multiple locking mechanisms. Engineers spent hours cutting the seams, documenting each step. Finally, the steel parted with a hiss, revealing an interior that seemed at once empty and impossibly alive. Within were rows of canisters, carefully arranged but covered in a fine layer of condensation. Sensors immediately detected warmth radiating from the sealed vessels, subtle, uneven, and unexplainable given the absence of power. Each canister emitted a low-frequency magnetic hum, steady and persistent, imperceptible to the human ear but measurable on scientific equipment. Watches placed near the containers began to behave erratically. One young scientist, observing his own wristwatch, noted in alarm that the hands had begun to spin counterclockwise, a phenomenon repeated on multiple devices throughout the vault. The investigators maintained procedural discipline, logging every reading, photograph, and observation. Yet a palpable tension filled the room. Each pulse of warmth, each magnetic fluctuation, carried an unspoken warning. The instruments seemed to respond to the presence of the observers, the act of measurement itself feeding a dormant reaction. Attempts to manipulate or move the canisters yielded nothing predictable. The objects remained inert to touch, weight, and proximity, yet the magnetic readings persisted. The air, though mechanically circulated and filtered, carried a faint vibration that caused hair on the back of the neck to rise and made metal tools tremble slightly in hand. By mid-afternoon, one scientist stepped back, overwhelmed by the subtle effects. His watch, spinning backward for several seconds, seemed to unnerve him beyond professional detachment. He collapsed against the vault wall, pale and disoriented, though vital signs remained stable. Colleagues assisted him, noting every irregularity in meticulous detail. The team debated further inspection, but higher authorities intervened. Orders arrived to reseal the vault immediately. No report was to be filed beyond an internal acknowledgement. The discovery was to remain buried, classified under the highest security levels. Instruments were turned off, sensors stored, and the steel door welded once more. The warmth lingered briefly after the sealing, fading only as the steel cooled. The last page of the official log, typed with precise detachment, bore a single, chilling notation: vault sealed. Residual activity noted. Authorized personnel only. Beneath the bureaucratic phrasing lay a stark truth. Whatever energy remained inside the forgotten vault was neither inert nor neutral. It persisted quietly, almost sentiently, shielded from view and inspection, waiting for the inevitable moment when human curiosity would return. And as the steel closed over the canisters, the faint magnetic hum continued, an unbroken heartbeat beneath the Ministry of Defense, a silent reminder that the past had never truly ended. In the mid-1980s, the British National Archives in Kew were a labyrinth of dust, sunlight streaking through tall windows and illuminating particles in perpetual motion. Among the musty shelves, a historian and journalist named Edward Keane combed through misfiled RAF documents, seeking forgotten details of post-war operations. His interest was initially academic, aimed at chronicling the unremarkable logistics of chemical research during the Second World War. What he uncovered, however, suggested that history had been deliberately obscured. The misfiled documents contained fragments of the Project Tempest initiative, handwritten logs, censored telegrams, and technical sketches. Among the fragments were personnel rosters spanning multiple decades, all containing the surname Harrow. Cross-referencing birth certificates, military service records, and university archives, he noticed a striking pattern. The Harrows, across 3 generations, consistently appeared linked to experimental chemical projects, each emerging during periods of intense military innovation. In one faded ledger, a name leapt off the page: Reginald Harrow, the grandson of Dr. Alastair Harrow, the inventor of the ignition-less propulsion prototype. Correspondents hinted at his involvement in classified wartime laboratories, yet no official acknowledgement existed. The trail continued backward. Dr. Alastair Harrow's experiments, his notes, and the mysterious disappearances surrounding Project Tempest. Keane meticulously traced the genealogy, assembling timelines, photographs, and archived letters. It was in a separate RAF file, miscatalogued under Aeronautical Tests, Miscellaneous 1914, that he found the photograph that would make his research both remarkable and disturbing. The black-and-white image depicted a young military chemist standing in front of early gas testing apparatus. The photograph was annotated, Harrow, A. Field Test, Ypres, 1914. The man's facial features, sharp and angular, were unmistakable. But more than the shape of his face, the distinctive scars across his cheek mirrored those of Reginald Harrow decades later. Keane stared at the image for several long minutes, the microfilm flickering and casting shadows across his notes. The scars appeared identical in both the 1914 photograph and a later portrait of Reginald held in wartime intelligence archives. The realization was unsettling. Across generations, the same markings, the same physical imprint, seemed to persist. The archives offered no explanation. Journalistic rigor demanded skepticism, yet every piece of evidence supported the uncanny conclusion. Reports of Project Tempest, censored and fragmented, reinforced the notion that the Harrow lineage had been entwined with Britain's most secretive chemical projects. Each generation seemed inexorably drawn to the pursuit of experimental warfare, carrying not only knowledge but a physical legacy of participation. Keane carefully photographed the 1914 image, cataloging it alongside wartime intelligence records. He noted in his journal, "The same man, across decades." Dust motes floated through the sunlit air as pages turned and reels clicked. The combination of institutional secrecy, familial continuity, and the lingering traces of experimental energy created a narrative both factual and surreal. Here was the persistence of human ambition and its capacity for repetition etched across time. The legacy of Project Tempest was no longer confined to blacked-out files or classified vaults. Through genealogy, misfiled records, and the careful work of a persistent historian, its echoes had returned to light, revealing that the past was neither inert nor forgotten. And in the photograph, staring out from the year 1914, was the scarred face of a man whose identity seemed to defy the decades, a living testament to the unbroken lineage of invention, secrecy, and consequence. In the early years of the 21st century, NATO had installed advanced geophysical monitoring stations across southern England, part of a network designed to detect seismic activity, electromagnetic anomalies, and subatomic fluctuations. At the Berkshire facility, a series of underground domes glowed with LEDs, reflecting off damp concrete and polished steel. Outside, rain lashed against radar enclosures, casting blurred shadows across the sprawling array of antennas and sensors. Technicians monitored the displays in silence, the low hum of servers and data processors filling the control room. One analyst, cross-referencing archived wartime data with current readings, paused mid-keystroke. The magnetic resonance detected beneath Berkshire was unlike anything previously recorded, pulsed in irregular intervals, yet matched remarkably closely with historical Project Tempest records from 1943. Initial skepticism gave way to careful verification. Every calibration, every sensor alignment was meticulously checked. The anomaly persisted. The pulses were subtle, weak enough to be overlooked by standard monitoring, but consistent, detectable across multiple instruments. Software algorithms flagged the pattern, overlaying it atop digitized archival documents, pressure readings, magnetic flux data, and laboratory logs from wartime experiments. The match was exact. For a fleeting moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The energy had endured across decades, defying natural decay. Over the next several days, NATO scientists conducted repeated scans, employing magnetometers, subterranean radar, and quantum sensors. Data collection was thorough, methodical, and utterly sterile. Yet each 12-hour interval revealed the same pattern, a pulse followed by a lull, repeating with mechanical precision. Analysts checked and rechecked historical charts. The alignment was undeniable. The anomaly was persistent, cyclical, and entirely unaccounted for. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping against the dome in steady rhythm. Monitors flickered under the fluorescent glare as scientists cross-referenced the pulses with weather patterns, electrical storms, and geological activity. Nothing corresponded. The energy signature appeared independent of environmental influence, almost as if it maintained its own internal clock. Technical briefings stressed calm. Communication with NATO command emphasized containment and observation rather than alarm. Yet the underlying message was clear: an energy source, originating from forgotten wartime experiments, remained active under Berkshire. Its behavior was systematic, calculated, and, most troublingly, uninterrupted. Late one evening, a junior analyst compared the latest readings with the original 1943 Project Tempest test data. The repetition was absolute. Each pulse, each fluctuation, each decay curve mirrored the historical template. A senior engineer, reviewing the overlay, muttered in disbelief. "It's not decaying, it's counting down." The phrase lingered in the sterile control room, amplified by the quiet hum of servers and the rhythmic tick of environmental sensors. Every 12 hours, the pulse recurred, precise as a metronome, suggesting an ongoing process embedded in the material itself. Digital archives, previously dormant, became the only means of contextualizing the data. Analysts compared wartime lab notes, declassified mod files, and surviving photographs, seeking correlations with the modern pulses. While the science was sound and measurements reproducible, no theoretical framework accounted for a chemical or magnetic anomaly persisting over 60 years with measurable energy output. The final entry in the control log summarized the observations succinctly. Berkshire resonance confirmed. Pattern matches 1943 Project Tempest records. Cycle period, 12 hours. Source unknown. Continue monitoring. Countdown phenomenon verified. Beyond the domes, rain continued to streak the landscape. Within the earth beneath Berkshire, an energy signature, first created in the desperation of war, persisted with deliberate rhythm. Every 12 hours, it pulsed, silent yet insistent, a ghost of white fire, counting down toward an unknown event. By the 2030s, the world had grown accustomed to a new kind of surveillance, not merely of people, but of phenomena beyond comprehension. Beneath the Berkshire Plateau, sensors recorded subtle energy fluctuations that had persisted for nearly a century, tracing their origin back to the wartime experiments of Project Tempest. Governments across NATO and allied nations had convened in emergency protocols, codenamed Resurgence, to finally neutralize the lingering anomaly. The task fell to a team of international scientists, mathematicians, and AI specialists, operating under a veil of absolute secrecy. The laboratory was a cathedral of sterile metal, its walls suffused with red warning lights and fogged glass panels, each housing banks of quantum computers and magnetic stabilizers. The hum of containment fields was constant, low, and vibrating, a reminder that the anomaly's energy remained restless beneath the facility. Lead physicist Dr. Maren Falk oversaw the reconstruction of Project Tempest algorithms. Every sequence of calculations, every wartime test protocol had been digitized, encoded, and fed into AI systems capable of predictive modeling. The goal was straightforward in theory: generate a counter-algorithm that would absorb or neutralize the residual energy. Yet the complexity was staggering. The AI frequently paused, flagging anomalies that defied logic, suggesting the phenomenon might not merely be chemical or magnetic. It could be responsive, perhaps even quasi-conscious. As simulations progressed, a chilling pattern emerged. Each time human observers monitored the process directly, the energy signature subtly amplified. Indirect observation, via closed-loop sensors, moderated the effect, but the anomaly's response to attention was undeniable. Every intervention, every act of measurement, risked escalating the very force they sought to contain. Ethical debates erupted among the team. Should the operation proceed, knowing that human oversight might trigger amplification? The answer was determined by urgency. The world's largest power grids had detected minor disruptions, aircraft instruments registered minor fluctuations, and global defense networks logged inexplicable magnetic surges. Humanity had little choice. Observation, however dangerous, was unavoidable. At the climax of the operation, AI-controlled sequences initiated. Algorithms fed counter-resonance pulses into the anomaly, and the hum beneath Berkshire began to shift. Engineers monitored displays as numerical outputs fluctuated with increasing irregularity. The energy readings oscillated beyond predictive thresholds. Red lights flashed across the laboratory, illuminating fogged glass and tense faces. Even as they followed the AI's guidance, every observer felt the weight of inevitability. Centuries of secrecy, generations of Harrows, and countless deaths had led to this moment. The anomaly reacted visibly. Magnetic fields twisted instruments. Thermographic imaging displayed pulses that seemed almost organic, and subtle vibrations ran through the steel floors. A junior technician whispered into her headset, It's growing." Dr. Falk reviewed the data, confirming the horrifying truth. The energy intensified in proportion to the attention it received. Observation itself was feeding the anomaly. Time dilated in the sterile, humming lab. The team debated halting the experiment, but the AI insisted, the algorithms unyielding, the protocols rigid. There was no alternative. The anomaly could not be ignored, and yet, every step to control it seemed to empower it further. As monitoring screens flickered, the room fell silent. All sequences completed, displays went dark, and the red lights dimmed to a soft, eerie glow. The hum persisted, subtle but alive, threading through the containment grids and beneath the very floor. Dr. Falk recorded the final note in the classified log. Observation accelerates the anomaly. Countermeasures inconclusive. It grows when observed. The camera feed cut to black. In the silence, a faint ticking persisted, steady, deliberate, and incomprehensibly old. Humanity had confronted the culmination of its own ingenuity, only to realize that attention itself was part of the threat. The anomaly, patient and persistent, awaited the next observer. In the present day, a recovered archival audio log emerged from a secure government depository, its provenance obscure and deliberately obfuscated. The recording, digitized from an aging magnetic tape, carried the low, measured voice of an anonymous archivist. It began with a statement that would redefine decades of wartime research and secrecy. Project Tempest was never destroyed. It was transferred. The words reverberated through the viewing room of the investigative team, a quiet tension filling the sterile, climate-controlled chamber. Outside, fog rolled over empty Berkshire fields, curling around the skeletal silhouettes of wind turbines and distant radar arrays. The landscape seemed frozen in a liminal state, neither past nor present, reflecting the paradox contained in the revelation. Footage from a modern government facility appeared on the monitors. The structure was sleek, metallic, and humming with subdued energy. Yet anyone familiar with historical records recognized the eerie continuity. The layout, the red warning lights, the rows of containment chambers mirrored precisely the underground laboratories of 1943. Even the faint humming of the building's infrastructure resonated with patterns recorded in wartime blueprints. The facility was new, but its architecture, intent, and operational rhythm echoed history. Scientists and analysts on the team documented every frame, comparing structural schematics with declassified documents spanning 80 years. It was apparent the project had evolved alongside technological advancement, preserving its essence while shifting locations, funding sources, and personnel. Project Tempest had never ended. It had simply adapted, transferred seamlessly into contemporary defense institutions, continuing the cyclical narrative of human ingenuity applied to destruction. The audio continued, detailing the ethical justification provided in the archival log, a justification rooted in deterrence, secrecy, and perceived necessity. The narrator's tone remained grave, almost reverent, emphasizing the weight of responsibility rather than the technical specifics. Mentions of AI-assisted monitoring, advanced containment protocols, and the transfer of historical data across generations highlighted the continuity of purpose. The preservation and potential deployment of a force mankind had not yet fully comprehended. The team observed the control room feeds. Red lights pulsed methodically, identical in cadence and intensity to those recorded during World War II experiments. Sensors displayed faint but persistent magnetic oscillations beneath the foundation, echoing patterns from the earliest Project Tempest data. Despite advancements in technology, the anomaly, whether chemical, magnetic, or otherwise, persisted. Time and progress had not diminished its presence. Silence filled the chamber as the final moments of the footage unfolded. The camera pans revealed fog drifting across an otherwise empty field, the facility looming like a sentinel from history. The archivist's final words echoed once more through the room. Transferred, not terminated. The legacy endures. Then, the screen flickered red. A pulse of light, perfectly consistent with all previous observations, shimmered across the display before cutting to static. Only one sound remained, a faint, deliberate ticking, echoing from speakers or perhaps the very earth beneath Berkshire. It was subtle, but it carried a resonance that suggested continuity, vigilance, and an unsettling patience. The team sat in tense contemplation. Humanity's most secretive weapon had outlived its creators, its inheritors, and the eras of conflict that had birthed it. The narrative was clear. Innovation and ambition, unchecked, repeated themselves across decades, quietly shaping history even when hidden beneath bureaucratic veils. Project Tempest, in its many forms, had persisted, not as a footnote, but as an enduring testament to mankind's capacity to create, contain, and ultimately be haunted by its own inventions. And in the silence that followed, the ticking continued, a faint, inexorable reminder that some legacies never end, and some dangers, though unseen, remain patient. The secrets of Project Tempest may have ended, or so they thought, but its legacy lingers beneath the fields of Berkshire even today. History is rarely black and white, and the shadows of war still echo through time. If you want to explore more untold missions, hidden experiments, and stories the world almost forgot, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we venture into the unsung World War stories. Every secret has a story. Are you ready to uncover it?